Substance Designer is one of the leading software for texture creation in the game art industry, and many students found about it in university or ArtStation, but I found about it in a really different way. 3 years ago, when I was starting out to learn game art as a self-taught artist, I wanted to texture one of the 3D models I have done, but Substance Painter didn't have all the tools I needed for the detailing I wanted to do for my prop. I felt super restricted by the generators the software had and my skill in art and technical aspects of the software. But one day, when I was speaking with a friend of mine who was studying game art at university, he told me about this weird software called Substance Designer. His idea of this software and the way he sold this software to me was that in Substance Designer you have full control of every aspect of your textures and you can create any texture you want from zero. However, until I have downloaded the software and opened, he never told me this was a quite intimidating software. First time I opened Substance Designer, I was like, what the f is this abomination? UI was not simple at all as other software like Blender, and in fact, my whole screen was a UI salad with nothing there to me and to understand it. And the worst part is that I didn't have any resources at that time that would explain me everything step by step into details. Now in this story, there's a big question. How did I manage to control this software and learn every single part of it till I become a professional? Well, I just watched it over 1,000 tutorials where professionals show me how to do things, and most of them were on ArtStation, or I have to buy it from Gumroad or other places like Level Up Digital. Yet that was not enough. The real learning came when I started to drop tutorials and push by myself trying to look for the solutions of the questions I have. 1 year after I started learning Substance Designer, I managed to get my first job, and now 5 years later of working in the professional industry for game development for AAA in outsourcing studios, I feel quite confident to give you my guide on how to learn every single aspect of the software from beginning to end without having to stress yourself over every single detail or if anything comes out wrong. So let's make the basics of Substance Designer and build our first part of a material we are going to be creating for this series. The Substance Designer course for beginners. So this is the file of Substance Designer. Now every time you want to create a new graph, we go to this section here, this blue button. Now once we are in here, you want to choose the metallic roughness section. You want to set this name to test video, in this case, because we are going to be doing the test and seeing all the UI, and then you want to choose your parent size. I have 32 GB of RAM, and I'm going to get this into 4K, but you can either use 2K or 1K. The higher the resolution you choose for your parent graph, it's going to be heavier on your memory. Now we're not going to touch anything of this, and we're going to go forward to press OK. Once we're in here, you're going to notice that the layout of my Substance Designer file is completely different to yours. Don't worry, this is normal, and that's because I have a pre-made area where I can change things for place. You can do the same for you, and you can arrange everything as I have it, playing around with these different parts. Now let's get into each specific part and see the most important thing that you are gonna need now as a beginner. The first area you want to look into and really learn is the Explorer section. So in the Explorer section, you have different things. The things we're gonna focus on is these two areas. The first one, as you can see, it says unsafe package. The whole file of Substance Designer is called a package, and inside this package we have different graphs. Each graph can be a material or a tool for us to build for Painter or even generators inside Substance Designer. So we can go here, do right click and create a new graph from here, or we can create many other things. So you can see I can even have inside one package different kinds of templates of Substance Designer. Now I'm not going to build a new one, but what I want to show you is that if you click in this arrow below in your graph, you're going to have all the outputs that are going to be here in your graph, but we are going to talk about those later. Now these graphs in here can be used in different ways. Like for example, you can make your own nodes in here, have it here like this, and use it in other projects by dragging them into your graph. Right now it's not going to do anything in particular because it's actually the same graph, but if I were to create a new graph in here and now yes, drop the test video, you're going to see that we are creating a new node with the outputs of the first graph and the name of it. If you right click any of these graphs, you have different options. The one we're going to do is remove this. Now, the second thing I want to show you is that you right click in here, you have many other options, but the one you really want to learn about is export with dependencies. When you export with dependencies, the graph is going to be exported into one single folder with another folder called resources. So if you are using imported images like PNG, SVGs, or even scan data or new nodes that many other people don't have and you want to share with a friend, then this is going to allow you to send it to them with everything in place. Our second section might be one of the most important parts that you are going to be spending a lot of time, and it's the library. In here you have every single function and node in Substance Designer, and you are going to focus only in a little of them. Why? This area turns to be quite overwhelming because, as you can see, there's hundreds of nodes in different sections. Now, the part you really want to look into as a beginner are the noises and patterns. Every time you want to build something new in Substance Designer, just go for noises and patterns and explore with this. I recommend that you have this at hand because if you don't know which nodes they are here, then you can start testing them out in here in your graph. When we make a material, it's important that we see what's going on. That's why we have actually two windows for this. It's the 3D view and the 2D view. Now, if you don't see any of them or you just casually close one of them like this, you can just go to the Windows section, go here, 3D view, and you can have many other things in here. If you have this result, you go into your graph, you do right click and view outputs in 3D viewport. And this is going to hold up. Now, what do we do with the 3D view? What we are going to do is we're going to go to the material section, set this to default, go here, go to metallic roughness and tessellation plus displacement. To your right, you're going to have all of these areas opened. You want to close all of them and leave only the height open. What we're going to change is the tessellation factor to a minimum of 16. If you go higher than this, it might really take a heavy load in your computer. Now, for the scale, we are not going to use 10. That's a lot. So we're going to go lower down to a value of 2. That's the recommended value I use. Now, we're not going to get into the rest of the parameters in here, but we are going to see the tiling, which is going to allow us to tile the material several times in our 3D view. Now, let's talk a little bit about the object we have in here. This object can be changed by clicking here on the scene. Now, there's many objects, but there's only some you really want to get into. In the first section in here, you only want to get into the plane high res. The reason for this is that if you have something plugged into your material and you want it to have a really great displacement, as you can see here, we can check this here into default and edit. You see that I can change the scale here and it's going to go higher. But if I change my scene from my plane high res to a plane, this is going to look horrible. That's because there's a low count of polygons in this plane and we want something with high polygons. The other surface you can use beside the plane high res are basically the round cube, the round cylinder, and also the sphere 2 tiles. I usually work a lot with the plane high res and the round cylinder. For this case and occasion, we're gonna work over the plane high res. Now, as you can see, there's a light moving around in our 3D viewport, but we are only moving the object and not the light. So what you can do is do Ctrl Shift and do right click, and you can move this light around the object. You can add an extra light in here by going to the light section, edit, and in here you go to point light 1, you enable it, and you increase the intensity to something like 20. Now the light is not really visible. The reason for that is because you have to do Shift, right click, and you start to move it up and down, and you're gonna see that the new light is actually there. Now we're gonna stay with the basic lights Substance Designer offers us, but we're gonna look into another area, and that's the tile generator 2D. Now the tile generator 2D is gonna actually allow us to see what's going on inside every node. Each node holds an image that we're gonna be editing to create our material. Now if you double click in another node, you're gonna see that the image changes. Something curious about Substance Designer is that you can go from one node to another one without changing the image. How do we do that? If you double click in one node, you're going to preview that image. But if you do one click in another node, you're going to have all the parameters of that specific node you choose while maintaining the view in the other one. This allows us to make change in our parameters and see how it really affects the image that we are looking at. A tool that is super important in Substance Designer is also the information value. This information value is taking the information of each pixel of your image based on the position of your mouse. So for example, if I go here to this dark area, we're going to have all zeros, and you can see it next to the HSB value. If you go to the white area, you're going to see that we have a value of 1. We're going to get a little more specific in those tools, but a little bit more in the future. Now we are missing 2 more areas, and this might be one of the most important areas that you have. And this is the graph. Your graph area is where you're going to build your materials and your blocks with every single node in Substance Designer. As you can see in here, is your graph. You can move your mouse wheel to actually move around the graph, and you can press Tab or space to look for a search bar and look for any node that you want to use. In this case, I'm going to look for a shape node, and it's going to be the first node we're going to work with because I need to show you the basics of Substance Designer. Now, once that we get in here, yes, you can see that this node can be moved around, and if you left click on this circle and you move it, you're going to have a line. This line is to be connected with other inputs. Now I'm going to create a second node, and it's levels. Now you can see that these 2 nodes are quite different. The nodes to the left are nodes that are basically built with other nodes inside Substance Designer, while the left one, which has green color on it, is an atomic node. There's a section of nodes inside Substance Designer that are called atomic nodes, and they are the core to everything you're going to do in here. If you're going to build a material, you are going to need these nodes, and there's no question about it. In fact, all the other nodes are built with these atomic nodes as well. Now, every node has an input and an output. as you can see in here. Now the shape node only has an output. That's because it's kind of like a tool and it's helping us get new results with the parameters that we have at our right. Now the levels node has actually two circles. One is an input, one is an output, but their colors are different. The gray one holds information for grayscale values. That means any value between 0 and 1 that has no color. The yellow one holds color information. But the levels and many other nodes have this specific input where you will see half of it is going to be gray and half of it is going to be yellow. This means this node is going to change depending on what input you're going to get into it. If you get a grayscale value, the node will change to grayscale. If you get a uniform color, which is color information, and input this in here, the node is going to change to color information. Now, all of our nodes have parameters, that this is the section to our right. Now, these parameters are actually divided in two sections. First, the base parameters. The base parameters are parameters that every single node have, and it's kind of like they run in circle every single time. Now, the instance parameters are the parameters specific of this node, are the ones that someone exposed in order for you to actually make something of it and can change a lot of things with this. Depending on each node that you can choose, you're going to have different parameters or outputs or inputs to use. It really depends on the usability of the node and what it was built to. Now, before we jump into actually explaining you everything inside Substance Designer, how it works, I want to show you something else about the UI. You can change a lot of how your UI works really easy. If I plug everything in here to actually have an image, what you're going to see is that I can make this unplug from my actually software. So if you have a second screen and you want to have things split, you can have this in another screen around here, and you're going to be able to see it in another screen while keep working on this software. If you click on it again, it's going to go back to where you left it. Now, if you click the second icon, you're going to actually full screen it. Yeah, you can still work on this area, but you're not going to be able to work in another screen. This is quite useful when you're working with an image that has very small details and you want to really zoom in, you can do that. Now, another fun fact of the 2D image is that we can see detailing. If I were to scale down this, then maximize the view window, I press space, I'm gonna see the image being repeated. And this red area is basically the limit of my image. Before that, it's already starting to tile too much. Now, inside the graph sections, we actually have some extra things that you might wanna be aware of. First is the parent size. When we talk about parents, we talk about hierarchy. When we talk about hierarchy, it means that there's a block of command between each other. Now, the parent is the father of all. This means that everything that changes in the parent is gonna change in the things that are gonna follow. The nodes are child of the parent. That means if something changes in the parent size, then it will change in the nodes. For example, if I go in here, you can see that my node has information. This number in here shows me the resolution of the node. If I change the resolution of the graph, it's going to change the resolution of my node as well. I'm going to set it back to 4K, and we have some extra parameters in here in the graph, and we have some extra details in here in the graph. So first we have the resolution of our image, then we have the bitmaps. As you can see, this says L16. This means that this image has 16 bits. If we go to our base parameters and look for the output format, if you click into this, you're going to see that it's set to relative to parent. That means if the graph changes, this is going to change. But if we set this to absolute, we are going to be able to change the result of this without caring what the parent does. Finally, the last thing we need to look into the nodes in this area for the graph is this number in color that we have here. The milliseconds is the amount of time your computer is taking to calculate every single node. The color red means that this is the heaviest node that you have in right now. The color green means that the node is not that heavy. The heavier nodes you have, the different colors are going to start to appear. So remember that green is safe, red, you're going too heavy. So we can choose to have all this information displayed in a specific area. If we go here and you click on this, you're going to have all of these areas. See, you can display timing, node size, and also connector name. This is when you drag your mouse on top of the connector, you're going to see that it has a name. Another quick tip that is quite useful is that if you left your mouse on top of your nodes, it's going to give you a brief explanation of what that node does. As you can also see, there's some lines, yes, and when we start making our graph, these lines are gonna get super messy. We can control these lines in different ways. First, you can come in here and click on this. This is gonna make the lines kind of more square-like. I usually don't like this, it makes things organized, but when you have bigger graph with a lot of lines, it's gonna get a really messy. So we're gonna leave it like this. Another thing you can do is that if you select a line, you press Alt and then you do this, you're gonna see that there's gonna be a dot appearing. These are called actually dots. And if you do a left click, you're gonna create this. And this is allowing you to actually organize, yes, your lines and where you want them to have. Now these dots are quite powerful because they can convert to portals. If I create a new dot here and I input this information, yes, and I go into the specific parameters, I can put a name to it. So we're gonna put this as name shape test, and press enter. And as you can see, now the name is in here. If I create a new dot and I go to the input portal and use this, you're gonna see that now what I see here is also gonna happen here. And if I change the parameters in here, it's gonna change there as well. Now, these are some of the most basic things inside Substance Designer, especially when it comes to UI and using the software. Now, let's get a little bit more serious and talk about how does the software work and how do we create our materials. Now, once you actually understand the UI of Substance Designer, it's still actually quite hard to get started with a material. And the reason for that is because you don't know how this works. So let me show you. The way Substance Designer works is by creating chains of nodes together. I can do this with different nodes and create new results. For example, if I wanted to make a really small square with a center in it, I can just go here, change this here, go into a blend node that is going to help me do something that we're going to talk about later, and I can get a new result. Now, by doing this, we can actually see the power of Substance Designer. I can change my results by actually moving parameters, and I'm not destroying anything. This means that the workflow is non-destructive. But here's the problem. When you work in Substance Designer, you are basically building a system. This system has blocks and it has stages. You need to organize everything quite good, and you need to do it the right way. If you make a mistake in the beginning of your graph, then it's gonna be hard to fix it more in the end of your material. And the biggest problem is that all the information you're gonna add to your material later is gonna be based on what you did at the beginning. Picture your material as a building. When you create a building, you start by the platform. If the platform is not well done, then the building itself might fall down if something unexpected happens, or not even by that, it might fall down just because it's badly done. In Substance Designer, this happens as well. If we don't do things right at the beginning, then we're not gonna get the best results at the end. Now let's talk about some extra nodes before we start with this. These nodes right here are the outputs. These are the different images that you're gonna be exporting for your textures. We have base color, normal, roughness, metallic, ambient occlusion, and height. And we're gonna talk about them in another video when we talk about PBR and textures and how are they composed. Now, if you want to see what you are exporting and learn how to export these images for your texture, you just want to go to this tool right here and click on export outputs. You're gonna have different areas here, so let's break this down. First, you're gonna have your destination. Usually it's the same place where you're saving your file. Then you're gonna have your format. You want to use always PNG or TGA for this, mainly because it gives you the best quality. In here you have the preview of name that each image is gonna have. As you can see here, it has kind of like a line of code. The way it works is that it's saying $graph. This is calling for the name of the graph, and then it calls $identifier, which is the actual identifier of the outputs nodes that you have, and we're gonna see it right now. That's why when we see the preview of the name, it says test video, this is the name of our graph, and base color, the identifier of the output that we are using. We can choose to export all our textures together, or just choose one of them to export if we just want to update one single map and we want to save some time. Now, if you're working in 4K, can you only export this in 4K? The answer is no. You can actually export this in different resolutions. You just need to go to batch export, go down here and change the output size. You can even choose to have different resolutions in here if you click in this area. Now that we have talked about everything that is important so far, let's get a little bit into how to work in Substance Designer and build something and explain how does Grayscale information work. But before we do that, we need to set up our graph. We're gonna go to our normal map and set this to 5, and you need to make sure that this is in DirectX. Then we're gonna go to our roughness and we're gonna change the value. But first, let me show you why. We need to change the basic value of our roughness because, as you can see, it's way too much. It's reflecting too much light and it's not gonna allow me to actually see what's going on in there. So you're gonna go here to the roughness and we're gonna set this to 0.5. We're not gonna touch the metallic, and for the ambient occlusion, we're gonna use something different. We're gonna use what we call an AO node or an HBAO. I'm gonna set this in here and this in here. Now what we are gonna do is we're gonna use world units and set the quality to 16 samples. And in order for us to have a better view of what we are gonna be working on, we're gonna set the height scale in centimeters to 10. Now, depending on the material you have, then you will need to change this to the actual scale. But for the moment, it's not gonna be important for what we're gonna be building right now. Now, on the height, I like adding an HQ blur. This blur is gonna actually help us soft a little bit the information of our height map, so we don't have any pinching in the displacement in Unreal or Marmoset when we're rendering or using the material in a game. We're using a really low value of 0.1 and a quality of 1. Now we're gonna input all of this here, and I'm gonna create a portal node that is gonna be called height. Now that name is horrible, so I'm gonna change it again. There we go. I can't see much with the new mic in here. We're gonna input all in here. And what I'm gonna do to create the new portal, I'm gonna do Alt, left click, and it creates the portal for me. Yeah. So now that I have everything here and set, we're going to talk about what makes Substance Designer, and how does it work. And for that, we need to learn how does Grayscale information work in Substance Designer. So in here, we have a shape node and we have a square. And as you can see that in our 3D viewport, we have a square and then we have the plane again. Now in our 2D viewport, we are seeing actually something different. And this is a black and white image. Now, if we go in here into 2D viewport and we take the information, and we go with our mouse here, you're gonna see that in the black area we have all values of 0. If you check to the RGB and the HSB, all are gonna be 0. But if we go to the white area, out of the blue, everything is a 1. This means that in Grayscale information, white is 1 and black is 0. You cannot go higher than 1, you cannot go lower than 0. That means that in our graph, 0 is gonna be the lowest point of your material and white is going to be your highest point of your height information. But we will never use any of these two values. You don't want to use white or black. Black means also that you don't have any information, and white means that you have capped your information, and that's going to show like just a plain surface. So right now we have this shape and we have a really hard cut, as you can see here. Our square has a really straight line and we want to create a bevel for this. The question is, how do we create a bevel for any surface in Substance Designer when we are sculpting our shapes? Now the reason this is kind of like a hard cut is that if we go to the 2D viewport and check this, you see that we have a straight jump from 0 to 1. If we are looking this into a graph, we would see that this is actually straight line to the top. So if we want to change this, we need to create a gradient. This is gonna make the change between the lowest point and the highest point more smooth. And if we want to smooth something, then we have to blur this. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get an HQ blur, get the quality to 1 and lower the intensity around here. Then I'm gonna connect this in here and you're gonna see that this has change. Now if I go in here and look at this area and I zoom in, you're gonna see that I can see exactly every single pixel. And if I open also the information tab and I go from this here, you're gonna see that around here we have 1, and as we get away of the center of our image, those values start to go down. That means that we are successful in creating this gradient for our material until we get to 0 around here. Well, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, there, 0. Now there's different ways of controlling information in Substance Designer, and we're gonna look into two nodes. The first one is the leveled node. This controls all the information on all our pixels in a quite uniform way. So I can pull my blacks towards my whites, or I can put my whites towards my blacks, and this is gonna have an instant effect. You can see that with this I can change and do whatever I want with this information. So you can see here. Now I want to do something maybe like this. And the second node that we're going to look into for controlling Grayscale information is going to be the curve node. The curve node is going to allow us to do way more different things inside a curve. It's basically the same node as the levels, but it allows you to transform your information in a different way. So if I were to actually click in here, you're gonna see that I'm gonna create a new line in there, and I can actually keep working with this, creating new lines and changing the shapes. You can use this in different ways, and I have some friends that have been using this node to create patterns, and we may do a video on that in the future. But right now, this is quite useful when you want to do frames or more kind of hard surface things. This is the way to go, even for ornamentals. Now let's talk about blending information, because this is gonna be super important. So I'm gonna get the levels in here, and I wanna have a really nice bevel kind of around here for my shape. Yeah, now I don't like how this is looking, so I'm gonna just go a little bit back there and go a little bit like this and lower more the intensity of the blur to have more kind of like straight edge in there. And we are gonna talk about blending information, and for that we need the blend node. I'm gonna create a new node in here. I'm gonna set this to a disk, and I'm gonna create a blend. So as you can see in here, this blend has 3 inputs. The first one is the foreground, and the second one is a background. And finally, you have the opacity. Substance Designer works with math. We are calculating exactly every single pixel and what happens in each of them. The blend nodes allow us to make math operations between every single pixel. You can look to the blend node as it was an actual math operation. And inside this math operation, we have the blending mode, that is going to be what kind of operation we are running. Let's get an example. The background is going to be the first part of your operation. The blending mode is going to be exactly what kind of operations you're going to be running. And the foreground is the second value you're going to have in your operation. And the output is the result of this new operation. So right now, if I were to actually go in here and set this to subtract, you're going to see that I'm subtracting this shape to this one based on all the pixels that are covering this area. Now, if I were to use a second node in here and choose something like this and use a mask, it's gonna change. We are masking this so this effect only happens in a specific area, and if it has a gradient, it's gonna also have a really good effect on it as well. Now you can also play a little with the opacity to choose how much you want this operation to happen. Now, if we go back here to the blending modes, we are gonna actually see different things. You're gonna have the copy. This is just copying one image on top of the other. You can use a mask in here to actually change this. You can go over the add to add information one over the other. Right now you're not going to be able to see it quite well because it's actually not as big, so we're going to go into the darker areas so you can see that now I'm blending both images together. Then you have the subtract, that is the one that we already seen. The multiply, this is basically a multiplication. Yes, if we have 0 but every number is going to be 0, if we have 1 by any other number that is not 0, you're going to have exactly the same number. Then you have, we're going to go into the max and min darken, and these ones are the most fun to show actually. So if I create a tile generator in here and I go down to luminance random, set this around here and duplicate this and change the random parameter, I can use a blend node to choose which of these squares are going to be kept based on the value they have. The way we do that is by using a max lighten. The max lighten is going to read every single pixel of your image and it's going to decide which pixel between these two images has the maximum value. And that's going to be the pixel that is going to be staying in your image. So if I go here, you can see that this square is kind of like a really dark gray. If you go to the other one, this one is kind of more lightened. And if I go back to my blend node, you're going to see that that's the one that is staying. Now we can do exactly the same, but do the opposite if we go to a min darken. This means that we are choosing the minimum value of each pixel in our image. Now I could explain every single mode in Substance Designer for these blending nodes, but I have a full video on that already and you can watch it right there. So we're going to keep moving forward with the rest right now. So to start our material, we actually need to do a whole process of creation, doing research and many other things. But today we are not going to get into that. We are just learning how to use it. But we are going to build a small pattern for you today. So I'm going to destroy this in here. And the only thing I'm going to be using today is going to be the tile generator and its family. That is going to be tile random and the tile sampler. Now we're going to actually keep with this one, but I wanted to show all of this for you because these are going to be the core to actually making patterns. So as you can see, this tile generator has its own tiling and it's actually quite similar to the tile sampler. The only difference is that this has more input and it has more usabilities that are more advanced, and we are going to look into the future. But if you really want to see the power of this node, you can look into Martin Smith's portfolio, that he has a lot of breakdowns using this node to create really amazing patterns. Now the tile random is quite similar to the rest of them, but the only thing is that it's going to try to make this a little bit more random for us. We can choose any image to use, as you can see here, but it's going to be divided in different areas. It's going to change the shape and everything, and it's quite useful for making kind of stone patterns mainly, or floors, where you have different variation of shape and size in your tiles. Now we're going to keep with the tile generator for this one because it's actually quite easy to use. If you go into the tile generator, you're going to see that we are using a shape that has this gradient. We're going to use actually the square, and we're going to go here to the scale check section and lower this down a little bit. Now we can actually change the image that we're using in another way. If we go here with the shape node and input this in here and then create another one but with a disk, and we go to our node, the tile generator, in the pattern section, you can change the pattern by changing this to image input, and we can increase the amount of shapes that you want to input. So as you can see right here, we have both shapes, but they are actually quite random. The placement and how they are organized, it's really random. The reason for that is because you are using the pattern input distribution to random. If we change this to by pattern number, you're gonna see that they are gonna have a specific order. You can change this as much as you want, or you can also use the tile sampler with exactly the same settings, but it's gonna align things in a different way. If I go here and change it again to pattern number, you're gonna see that they are aligned in a more different way despite the tiling is also different. So this node is going to help us actually build our patterns. The way it's going to do it is by the amount on X on Y. This is choosing how many shapes do we have in the X axis and how many shapes we have in the Y axis. Right now we're using a 10 by 10. I'm going to plug this in here right now. And you can see that it's actually working quite right. But we are going to do a small wood floor to start with. I'm going to start over with a tile generator, and I'm going to start with a square shape. That's everything I'm going to need. I'm going to lower the scale to 0.9, and I'm going to start by changing a little bit of what we are doing here. I want to go into something more like this. Yeah. So this is going to be a good generator. Now I want to go to the position area. I want to set the offset to 0.5, and it's going to look weird. But then if you click on vertical offset, this is going to change. Now there's a space between these tiles, as you can see here. So what I want to do, I want to close that space, and we can do that by using the intersize. If I increase my scale in here, it's not really work well. You see that it's actually, they're kind of closing, but there's still a big gap. So we're going to do the intersize, and we're going to use a lower value, like a negative value. We're going to start by minus 0.1. This is too much. 0, 1. Okay, so we're going to start from here, go back to 5. 5 is too much. Let's go 2. Too small. 3 is too much. Let's go 2, 5. Just you need to find your really good value for this. Now, once we have this, we're going to plug this into our height. And we have our first pattern. Now, the power of Substance Designer actually comes from this. If I'm working with a material like this one and I want to change something, for example, the amount of planks I have, I can just go here and change this number. And it's gonna change exactly the tiling of my material. As you can see, I have more and more wood planks. If I want to change also the length of them, I can add one more in here actually. And it's gonna help me quite a lot to do this as I move forward. Now this actually works kind of like in math. If I want to have the same predisposition here, I can down this by 2 and this by 2, and it should be exactly the same relationship but in another kind of tiling. Now let's move forward and kind of give this a little bevel, because this right now is actually quite harsh. So we're gonna get here an HQ blur, and we're gonna increase the quality, lower this to 0.2, and we're gonna use levels in here. Now I'm gonna plug this in here for you to actually see, and I'm gonna pull this up and this down a little bit, so we have something like this. Yeah, and these are gonna be our wood planks. Now I want to give them a little bit of edge variation. So in this edge variation, what you can use is what we call the slope blur. The slope blur allows us to change our shape based in a slope map. I'm gonna be using the clouds too. The clouds 2 is going to be input in here, and we're going to get the samples to maximum always, and we're going to set the intensity to 0.1. Always start with a value of 0.1 because this node is too strong, as you can see, and it's going to destroy your shape. Do not use directly this noise because it's going to just destroy everything you are building. And we want to build something subtle with details. I'm going to repeat a lot this about the details because I think it's quite important, and students have a lot of problem with this and usually use too strong noises. Now what we're going to do is going to change this to min. The min mode allows us to push our edges inwards based on our slope map, and I'm going to lower this to 0.02. This is going to make a really small change. You can also get your clouds too and blur it a little bit to change the intensity of this. And you can see that it's going to change as well. Now once we have this, I want to add some height variation, and we can do it in 2 ways, and we can learn also how to mask individual shapes in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to get from this node a flood fill. The flood fill node is going to read every single shape in your image that is 1 pixel apart from each other, and it's going to assign it a RGB value. Now once it has this, you can use this as a filter to create different nodes, use different nodes. We're going to use the flood fill to random grayscale and the flood fill to gradient node. The first one is going to be giving us an individual random grayscale value for each plank. We can use this with a blend node and use a multiply to change the different height of our wood planks, as you can see here. Now this is actually too much, so I'm going to lower a little bit in intensity here, but it looks really good. But I want to actually add something else to the flood fill to gradient. So what we're going to do, and we're going to try, is that if I pull this here again and I repeat the process but with the flood fill to gradient, this is going to give another kind of feeling. Now if I go to my flood fill to gradient and set the angle variation, this is going to feel a little bit more realistic, but it's too much and I want to be really specific about each area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the flat fill to random grayscale and do a duplicate and set the random seed to 1. Then I'm going to get the histogram scan node. This is going to help us to make a very specific mask. If I set my contrast to 1 and I start to increase my position, it's going to start to get different shapes in my image that have a contrast of 1 onwards. So it's going to start to push everything up, and I can choose exactly which of the wood planks I want to affect, and I can do the same with all of these, as you can see. Now I'm going to do this first with this area, and what I'm going to do to save some space and memory, I'm going to duplicate this in here and create a blend. And I'm going to use the first mask to subtract the values of the second mask. This is going to allow me to actually not have two masks that are applying into the same space. So now if I increase the value of the first histogram scan, you're going to see that I'm going to be affecting different things. And now we have more variation in these planks. If I were to have a bigger tiling, this would work better. Now, working in Substance Designer is actually quite a lot of work. As you can see, we have already gone quite a lot into the video. Now, we managed to make the first part of a material. Now, you can check our brick pattern creation tutorial to learn a little bit more about the basics of Substance Designer and how to create more specific patterns, and learn more about using the tile generator for different occasions and many other nodes like the ones we've just seen. In the next chapter, we're going to go into the creation of these materials for the sim and building. We're going to be building concrete in tiles and in different areas, and we're going to end this by making a nice render inside Unreal Engine. I hope guys you really enjoyed today's videos, and if you have any comment on feedback on how you want this to be actually developed and what you would like to learn or something I missed in this tutorial, please let me know and I'll add it in the next video.